Racist man slaps black kid mid-flight. Seconds later, a stranger stands up and changes everything. Eliot Mason wasn't afraid of turbulence. He was afraid of disruption, the kind that didn't come from storms in the sky, but from people's expectations on the ground. At just 16, Eliot had already accomplished more than most people twice his age. A finalist in the National Astrophysics Decathlon, he stood quietly at Gate 42 of Atlanta's Hartsfield-Jackson Airport, backpack slung over one shoulder, running through gravitational formulas in his head like prayers. His father had reminded him 3 times to back up his presentation files on USB, on the cloud, and even emailed to himself. Classic overprotection, classic love. But Eliot understood. It wasn't just about a competition. It was about legacy. Being the only black student in the top 12 finalists came with more than pressure. It came with weight, with eyes. As passengers lined up, a man in a sleek gray suit cut ahead of him, murmuring, "First time flying." Eliot gave a polite smile and said, "No, sir," using the calm, measured voice his dad called the Harvard interview tone. That moment set the tone. He had learned to shrink in places that didn't expect him to expand. But this flight to Seattle, to possibility, would become something else entirely. Not a journey to win, a journey to wake something deeper. Eliot stepped into the aircraft with quiet anticipation, ducking slightly as he entered the narrow fuselage. The cool, filtered air of the cabin smelled faintly of citrus cleaner and pressurized possibility. A flight attendant greeted him with a rehearsed smile, her eyes flicking to his lanyard that read, "National Astrophysics Decathlon," before turning to the next passenger. He moved forward, passing through the plush sanctuary of first class, where tailored suits were already sipping champagne, and into the tighter quarters of premium economy. There, passengers stretched out a bit more, headphones on, scrolling through preloaded content, but Eliot kept walking, clutching his backpack, until he reached the unspoken line between comfort and economy. Row 17. Middle seat. He stifled a sigh. Wedged into the window seat sat a girl about his age, with wavy jet black hair obscuring her face as she flipped through a thick book. In the aisle seat was the suited man from the boarding line, the one who'd questioned if it was his first flight. Now engrossed in his tablet, he barely looked up as Eliot arrived. "Excuse me," Eliot said politely. The man glanced at him, then sighed, clearly annoyed at the interruption. Still, he stood stiffly, muttering, "I had hoped you might be sitting elsewhere." Eliot said nothing, sliding into the seat with practiced silence. It wasn't the first time he'd heard a comment like that. Probably wouldn't be the last. As he settled in, adjusting his backpack under the seat, the girl beside him peeked out from behind her book. She gave him a quick smile. "They really designed these seats for toddlers." "Huh?" Eliot chuckled softly. "Or contortionists." "I'm Clara," she said, sticking out a hand. "Eliot." Her handshake was firm and unapologetic. He caught a glimpse of her book Sapiens by Yuval Noah Harari. "Light reading," he joked. Clara smirked. "My dad calls it intellectual comfort food. I call it a way to avoid talking to the guy on my other side." She tilted her head slightly toward the man in the aisle seat. Eliot gave a tight-lipped nod, understanding all too well. As if summoned by the mention, the man looked up. "Some of us are trying to work," he said, his tone clipped, patronizing. Clara zipped her lips with exaggerated flair and returned to her book, but not before giving Eliot a conspiratorial wink. Minutes passed. Passengers trickled in. The engine hummed louder. The seatbelt sign pinged on. As the plane began taxiing toward the runway, Eliot instinctively reached for the shared armrest. At the same time, the man beside him did the same, aggressively planting his elbow as if claiming territory. Eliot paused. For years, he learned to shrink himself in shared spaces, on the bus, in classrooms, at science conferences where he was the only kid of color in the room. But something about today, his father's embrace, the old woman's warmth at the gate, Clara's fearless wit, it pushed back. He placed his elbow back on the armrest. Their arms touched. The man stiffened but said nothing. Small resistance, but it felt like a victory. Once airborne, the plane settled into the humdrum rhythm of mid-flight. Clara scribbled notes in her book. Eliot pulled out his tablet to review his gravitational wave presentation. The man beside them, still nameless, still hostile, typed furiously into his device. Then, without warning, the man cleared his throat loudly. "Excuse me," he said, gesturing for the flight attendant. "Yes, sir. I paid extra for a working environment. These two are passing notes and giggling like schoolchildren. Is there any way I can be relocated to a more professional section?" Eliot's chest tightened. The flight attendant, a young black woman named Jada, according to her tag, smiled calmly. "I'm sorry, sir. We're at full capacity today." The man's lips thinned. "So I'm just expected to tolerate this?" Jada glanced at Eliot, then at Clara. "They're speaking quietly. Sir, I haven't received any complaints from other passengers. I'll continue to monitor the situation." The man scoffed and turned away. Clara leaned in and whispered, "Wow, the man is allergic to joy." Eliot grinned despite himself. Later, as the beverage cart rolled by, the man ordered a Scotch double. Eliot asked for water. Clara, a ginger ale. A few rows back, an elderly man with salt and pepper hair watched the interaction with quiet focus. He was dressed plainly, reading a paperback. His name, though no one knew it yet, was Anton Resnick. He watched Eliot and the man in the suit. He watched the way the boy leaned away, the careful way he held his body. And he remembered. At cruising altitude, Clara passed Eliot a folded note. "He's definitely the kind of guy who emails his Starbucks order to himself." Eliot snorted quietly. The man turned. "You find something funny, son?" Clara's expression froze. "No, sir," Eliot said evenly. "Just chatting with my seatmate. Maybe you should focus more on your studies and less on socializing." Eliot felt the familiar flicker of shame. He breathed. "I'm on this flight for the National Astrophysics Decathlon." The man raised an eyebrow. "Really good for you. Shows what can be accomplished these days with the right programs." Clara's jaw tensed. "He's a finalist. His project's on gravitational waves, and he got here on his own merit." The man smirked. "Of course. Diversity and excellence. What a modern world." Eliot felt it again, that invisible weight pressing on his chest. The cost of keeping calm. He said nothing. But in his silence, something changed. Clara saw it. Jada saw it. Even Anton saw it, quietly lowering his book. This flight was far from over. And Eliot Mason was just beginning to understand what kind of journey he was really on. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as the plane crossed into its second hour of flight. Outside, the sky burned a soft orange as the sun dipped behind distant clouds. Inside, tension thickened like pressurized air. Eliot sat rigidly, earbuds in, though no music played. His posture had grown stiff. He had reviewed his presentation slides 3 times, but his mind refused to settle. Every word from the man beside him, Victor Langston, as he had finally introduced himself, had layered another weight on Eliot's shoulders. Across the armrest, Victor had resumed sipping his scotch, occasionally typing on his tablet with passive-aggressive intensity. His fingers struck the screen like hammers. Every so often, he glanced at Eliot, then at Clara, his disdain barely masked. Clara had long since put her book away. Her arms were crossed, her legs angled slightly away from Victor. She hadn't said much since the last exchange, at Eliot's silent request, but the fire in her eyes hadn't dimmed. A soft chime signaled the seatbelt sign turning off. Eliot seized the opportunity. "Excuse me," he said quietly to Victor. "I need to use the restroom." Victor sighed dramatically but rose. As Eliot slid past, Clara pressed something into his hand, a small, folded square of paper. He nodded and continued down the narrow aisle toward the rear of the plane. Inside the cramped lavatory, he opened the note. "If he says anything to you when I'm not there, tell me. My mom's a civil rights attorney. She doesn't play." Despite everything, Eliot smiled. Clara's loyalty, so immediate, so fierce, was something he hadn't expected. He was used to navigating the world alone, being his own witness, his own advocate. But Clara made space for him, without asking, without demanding thanks. Back in his seat 5 minutes later, Eliot noticed something was off. Clara's posture was stiff. Her arms were no longer crossed but clenched in her lap. Her eyes didn't meet his. Victor was talking, his voice low and oily. "Just saying, you should be careful about the company you keep," he murmured. Clara's jaw clenched. Eliot stepped in before the moment soured further. "Everything okay?" he asked, eyes flicking between them. Clara answered first. "Mr. Langston was just explaining how I should be more cautious around, well, certain types of people." Eliot turned to Victor. "Is that so?" Victor gave a thin smile. "I was offering some friendly advice. As an older man, it's natural to want to protect the younger generation from uncomfortable situations." "I'm fine," Clara said sharply. "I don't need protection from anyone, especially not from Eliot." Victor's nostrils flared. Young people today have no respect for wisdom or boundaries. The words hung there. Eliot felt a slow burn start in his chest. He had tried to be respectful, to ignore the microaggressions. But now, Victor's mask of civility was cracking. The flight attendant, Jada, happened to pass by just then. "Everything okay in row 17? Victor's voice shifted instantly. "Just a spirited conversation. Nothing to worry about." Jada glanced at Eliot, who gave her a tight nod. She held his gaze a second longer than necessary, then moved on. But Eliot knew she had seen enough. Victor leaned back, sipped his scotch, and muttered under his breath, "Unbelievable." Eliot didn't respond. He turned to his tablet, trying to focus. but the pressure in his chest was rising like static before a storm. Clara passed him another note. "He's not going to stop." He wrote back, "I know." 30 minutes later, after the snack service, Victor turned to Eliot with sudden interest. "So, you said you're in some kind of science competition." Eliot hesitated. "Yes, astrophysics." Victor smiled thinly. "Fascinating. And your parents? Let me guess. Affirmative action hires." Clara froze. Eliot inhaled, then let it out slowly. "My father is a senior software engineer. My mother teaches comparative literature at NYU." Victor's smile faltered. "Well, good for them. Just goes to show anything's possible these days." Eliot held his gaze. "It always was. The difference is, people are finally being allowed in." Victor's expression darkened. "You don't think that maybe, just maybe, the standards are slipping?" "That's enough," Clara snapped. "You've been awful since takeoff. I'm done pretending you're just curious." "I'm voicing an opinion," Victor replied coldly. "You know free speech, or does that only apply to certain people now?" Before Eliot could stop her, Clara leaned forward, eyes blazing. "Your version of free speech involves demeaning a teenager who's accomplished more at 17 than you probably did at 30. Victor's eyes narrowed. "Watch your tone, young lady." "And you watch your condescension, old man," she shot back. Passengers nearby were starting to look. Phones were being lifted, slyly angled. Victor turned to Eliot. "What? Nothing to say now?" Eliot met his gaze. Calm. Direct. "I've said enough. You just didn't hear it because you weren't listening." Victor opened his mouth, then stopped. Something shifted in his eyes. Not humility, not regret, but something closer to embarrassment. For the first time, he looked like a man realizing he had miscalculated his audience. Then, as if to reclaim his control, he muttered, "You kids think you're so special, but life has a way of teaching you your place." At that moment, a voice called out from 7 rows back, "Sir, I believe this young man knows exactly where his place is, and is far ahead of yours." Heads turned. An older man, tall and lean with weathered features and sharp eyes, stood slowly in the aisle. His name was Anton Resnick. Victor scowled. "Stay out of this, old man." Anton stepped forward, his voice steady. "When you raise your voice to children, insult their intelligence, and use thinly veiled prejudice to disguise your discomfort, that concerns all of us." "Who the hell are you?" Victor asked, tone rising. Anton's expression was unreadable. "Someone who's seen men like you before and been silent far too long." The cabin fell silent. Eliot stared at Anton. He didn't know this man, but something in the way he stood, shoulders squared, eyes unwavering, made Eliot feel, for the first time that day, like he wasn't carrying the weight alone. This wasn't over, but something had shifted, and Eliot knew. He wasn't alone in the aisle anymore. The hush that followed Anton Resnick's intervention lingered in the air like smoke after a firework. Passengers glanced between rows, earbuds pulled out, movies paused mid-scene. Something had shifted, something irreversible. Victor Langston sat frozen for a second, his jaw clenched so tightly that a vein twitched at his temple. But he quickly regained composure, or tried to. He turned back toward the window, muttering under his breath, "Ridiculous. All of it." Clara leaned closer to Eliot. Are you okay? He nodded but didn't speak. Something in his chest had tightened. A cocktail of emotions, humiliation, pressure, anger bubbled close to the surface. He looked at Anton, still standing 2 rows away, and gave a faint nod of gratitude. Anton returned it with a calm that was almost ancestral. Minutes passed. The flight attendants moved through the cabin, collecting trash, checking trays. The captain's voice crackled through the speaker, announcing the beginning of descent. The wheels of the aircraft began their slow shift downward. Clara pulled her phone from her bag. I should text my dad, she said softly. He freaks out if I don't check in. Eliot chuckled. Mine's probably tracking the flight as we speak. As the plane dipped slightly, preparing for landing, Eliot reached down to retrieve his backpack and check that everything was in place. In the process, his elbow accidentally knocked Victor's arm, who had been balancing his coffee cup on the tray table. The cup tipped. A small amount of lukewarm liquid splashed across Victor's tablet screen. It was a minor accident, barely enough to warrant a paper towel. But Victor's reaction was anything but small. Watch it, he snapped, loud enough for the rows around them to hear. Eliot straightened immediately. Sorry, that was an accident. Victor grabbed a napkin from the tray and wiped his screen furiously. You've been a problem this entire flight. Talking, giggling, bumping into me like this is a playground. Clara turned, voice steady but sharp. He said it was an accident. That cup was precariously balanced. Victor ignored her. I should have asked to be reseated the moment you two sat down. But no, I get punished for trying to work in peace. Eliot stayed calm. We haven't done anything to you. Victor's voice rose another octave. You've been disruptive since takeoff, taking up space, disrespecting people around you. Okay, that's enough, Clara interjected. You've been rude, condescending, and flat-out racist. Victor spun on her, finger raised. Don't you dare pull that card with me. Card, Eliot echoed. You think this is about a card? The surrounding cabin went completely silent. Phones were already up. Several passengers were recording. The tension, once confined to row 17, had become a communal experience. Then, without warning, crack, Victor's hand came down hard across Eliot's face. The sound reverberated like a thunderclap through the narrow space. Eliot reeled, eyes wide in stunned disbelief, one hand slowly rising to his cheek. He didn't cry out, didn't move. The only thing that shifted was the weight in the cabin, every single passenger now locked in collective shock. Clara gasped audibly, her hands shooting to cover her mouth. A few rows back, a child started to whimper. A woman whispered, Did he just... Victor stood with his hands still midair, as if even he hadn't fully processed what he had done. From the back of the plane, flight attendant Jada came rushing forward. Sir, she barked. Step back right now. Victor blinked, suddenly aware of eyes on him. Cameras pointed his way, people whispering his name. James, the male flight attendant, appeared behind Jada. Everything okay here? No, Clara said, still trembling. He hit him. He slapped Eliot. I barely touched him, Victor blurted out. He bumped me. He was being aggressive. You assaulted a minor, James said calmly. Please gather your things. Authorities will meet you at the gate. Victor looked around, expecting someone, anyone, to take his side. No one did. And then Anton Resnick stood again. This time, he didn't just rise. He walked down the aisle with the slow, deliberate posture of someone stepping into a moment he had spent a lifetime preparing for. He stopped at row 17, placing his body physically between Victor and Eliot. "You will not touch this young man again," Anton said. Victor tried to laugh, the sound brittle and forced. "Who are you?" "His grandfather. I'm someone who's tired of watching bullies like you pretend to be victims. Stay out of this." "No," Anton said firmly. "Not this time." The words rang like a bell through the cabin. Not loud, not shouted, but final. Clara's voice wavered, but her words were clear. "He's been harassing Eliot since we sat down, whispering things, making remarks, acting like we don't belong here." Eliot, still holding his cheek, finally spoke. His voice was calm, resolute. "I tried to stay quiet. I tried to be respectful. But I've had to prove I belong my entire life. And even when I'm quiet, even when I succeed, you still see me as a threat." Victor's mouth opened, but no words came out. Then came the voice of authority and announcement over the speaker. "Flight 2622, prepare for final approach. Security personnel will meet the aircraft at the gate." Jada turned to Anton. "Sir, can you stay with them until we land?" He nodded. "Gladly." As Victor slumped back into his seat, deflated and furious, the weight shifted again. But this time, it shifted toward justice, toward witnessing, toward truth. Eliot looked up at Anton. "Thank you," he said softly. Anton didn't smile. He just nodded. "For James," he whispered. "And for you." Eliot frowned, confused. But Anton didn't elaborate. Not yet. Outside the window, the lights of the city glimmered in the dusk. The plane began its descent, and row 17 was no longer just another seat in the sky. It had become the place where silence ended and truth finally stood up. The plane touched down with a gentle thud, the wheels rumbling along the tarmac as a wave of tension released from every seat. But in row 17, the pressure hadn't lifted. If anything, it had just changed shape. Eliot sat still, a faint warmth still radiating from his cheek. He stared out the window at the dusk-lit skyline of Seattle, the city glowing like the future he had been chasing. But for the first time, that future felt heavy. Clara sat beside him, stiff and alert, one hand still resting on his forearm in silent solidarity. Anton remained standing in the aisle, refusing to move until instructed by the crew. His stance was quiet but unwavering, a guardian figure carved from conviction. "Ladies and gentlemen," the captain's voice rang out. "Welcome to Seattle-Tacoma International Airport. Local time is 6:47 p.m. Please remain seated while law enforcement boards the aircraft." The seatbelt sign went off with a ding, but no one moved. Victor Langston sat silently now, his suit jacket wrinkled, tie loosened, and jaw clenched. His earlier authority had shriveled. Now, all that remained was a man exposed his hate, his entitlement, his actions all recorded, witnessed, and irreversible. From the front of the plane, two uniformed airport police officers entered the cabin. They walked calmly but with clear purpose. One held a clipboard. The other carried a body camera blinking red. The lead officer reached row 17. "We've received multiple witness reports of an in-flight assault," he said. Can someone identify the involved parties? Clara spoke first. That man, she said, pointing at Victor. He slapped Eliot. He's been harassing us for the entire flight. Eliot didn't speak. He just looked up, meeting the officer's eyes with the kind of calm that isn't born from peace, but from endurance. We'll need statements, the officer said, nodding. Sir, he turned to Victor. Please gather your belongings. You'll be escorted for questioning. Victor hesitated, then spoke through gritted teeth. This is absurd. It was a misunderstanding. Now, the officer said flatly. The entire cabin watched as Victor stood. He reached up slowly, retrieved his tablet, and slung his briefcase over one shoulder. But as he turned to step into the aisle, a voice from 2 rows back pierced the silence. You forgot your dignity. A few quiet laughs broke the tension. Clara smirked. Eliot didn't. As Victor was led away, Eliot let out a long breath, one he hadn't realized he'd been holding for hours. And then the aisle was clear. Passengers began to move again, standing, stretching, retrieving bags. Anton remained beside them, motionless. Jada, the flight attendant, appeared, her expression soft but direct. Mr. Mason, Miss Nguyen. And sir, she addressed Anton, we'll need you to give a statement as well, if you're willing. We are, Clara replied without hesitation. Jada nodded and stepped aside. They're waiting just past the jet bridge. As Eliot stood, he caught a glimpse of himself in the darkened window, back straight, eyes alert, jaw tight. There was something new there. Not just pain or exhaustion, something closer to gravity, like the kind he'd studied for years. Invisible but undeniable. They stepped off the plane into the sterile brightness of the gate terminal, where another officer ushered them into a quiet corner with rows of plastic chairs. The buzz of arriving passengers, flight announcements, and echoing footsteps created a background hum, but the space around them felt still. Clara sat down, folding her arms, still visibly buzzing with energy. He better be arrested, she muttered. People like him walk around thinking the world belongs to them. Eliot didn't answer. He was staring at Anton, who remained standing, watching them both with an expression Eliot couldn't place. Part sorrow, part something else. You okay? Clara asked him. I will be, Eliot said. Eventually. Anton finally stepped forward, slow and deliberate. Mr. Mason, he said softly, can we speak for a moment, privately? Eliot glanced at Clara. She nodded and stepped a few feet away. Anton sat down beside Eliot, folding his hands. I need to tell you something, he said. And it may not make sense at first, but it matters. Eliot raised an eyebrow but said nothing. In 1975, I served in Vietnam. Young, foolish, scared of everything. And I had a friend there, a black soldier named James Henderson. Smart, brave, the kind of man who made people better just by standing next to them. Eliot's pulse picked up at the name. Henderson. Yes, Anton said, meeting his eyes. Your grandfather? Eliot stared at him, stunned. Anton continued. There was an incident. He saved my life. And I didn't save his. I stayed silent when my voice could have protected him. My silence cost him everything, his reputation, his record, his future. He paused, emotion threading through his words. I've carried that for 45 years, and I came to Seattle hoping to find him. To say the things I should have said when it mattered. Eliot swallowed. His mind reeled. My grandfather passed 2 years ago, he whispered. Anton's shoulders sank. Then I'm too late. No, Eliot said after a pause. You stood up today. Maybe not back then. But today, Anton looked at him, tears gathering at the edge of his eyes. I saw him in you. The way you carried yourself. The patience. The fire. And I knew. I couldn't stay seated again. Eliot didn't respond right away. Then he said, he used to say, every silence is a story waiting to betray you. Anton let out a trembling breath. Then maybe this story will be different. Eliot extended his hand. Anton stared at it for a second, then took it. Their handshake wasn't just introduction. It was a bridge across generations, across silence, across history. The air inside the small conference room smelled faintly of carpet glue and paper. Fluorescent lights buzzed above, casting an unflattering blue tone on everyone's skin. Eliot sat between Clara and Anton, both quietly waiting as an officer handed him a clipboard. This form is voluntary, the officer said gently, but we'll need your decision by the end of the night. If you want to press charges, we'll proceed with booking Mr. Langston for assault. Eliot stared at the form, fingers resting lightly on the pen. His cheek still stung faintly, not just from the slap, but from what it represented. Not just violence, but erasure. The kind that didn't leave bruises, but left boys like him wondering if silence made them safer. Clara spoke first. Eliot, you don't owe that man anything, she said firmly. He crossed a line. The fact that it happened in public, in front of dozens of people, doesn't make it better. It makes it worse. He didn't look at her. He was still staring at the form. The officer stepped outside to give them space. Anton shifted beside him. There's no wrong choice here, he said. Only the one you can live with. Eliot's hand clenched. That's the problem. I don't know what I can live with. Clara reached across and placed a hand on his wrist. Talk to us. He finally looked up. If I press charges, this becomes more than just a flight. It becomes a story, a viral moment. Another black kid caught in the middle of a firestorm. You didn't start the fire, Clara said. No, but I'll be the one standing in it. Every news headline, every comment thread, every person debating whether I provoked it. He paused, then added, more quietly, my father taught me to be twice as calm, twice as patient. Don't give them a reason to fear you, he'd say. What does it mean if I still get hit? Anton's voice was soft. It means it was never about how you behaved. It was always about how they chose to see you. That truth stung more than the slap. Eliot leaned back. His head touched the cold wall behind him. Part of me wants to walk away, he admitted. Go to the hotel. Focus on the competition. Get back to what I came here to do. Then why don't you? Clara asked, not accusing, just curious. Because if I do nothing, what's stopping him from doing it again? To someone else, to someone younger, someone less prepared. Anton nodded. There's power in mercy, Eliot, but there's also power in accountability. Mercy should be a gift, not an excuse for someone to avoid the truth. Eliot fell silent. Then he said, what would you have done back then? With my grandfather? Anton flinched not from the question, but from the weight of it. He looked down at his weathered hands, then up at Eliot. "I would have spoken," he said, "even if it meant losing everything, because the silence I kept cost more than I ever imagined. Not just to him, but to me." The room was still. Clara leaned closer. "Whatever you decide, we've got your back." Eliot stared at the form one last time. Then he picked up the pen. He checked the box. "Yes, I choose to press charges." He signed his name, slowly, deliberately, as if etching it into something larger than paper. When the officer returned, he took the form without comment, just a respectful nod. "Thank you. We'll take care of the rest. You'll be contacted if it moves to court." As they exited the room and stepped into the cool night air, the noise of the airport faded behind them. Eliot looked up at the stars just beginning to pierce the sky, tiny pinpricks of light in the vastness. Clara walked beside him, her backpack bouncing against her shoulder. "You okay?" "Yeah," he said, "not because it's over, but because I didn't walk away from myself." Anton smiled at that. "That's a lesson men twice your age still haven't learned." They reached the shuttle area, where a driver with a clipboard stood holding a sign with Eliot's name on it. Before getting in, Eliot turned to Anton. "Will I see you again?" Anton reached into his pocket and pulled out a card. "I hope so," he said. "There's more I want to tell you. About your grandfather. About the man who saved my life." Eliot took the card with care. "I'd like that." Clara gave Anton a quick hug. "Thank you for today, for showing up when it mattered." Anton's eyes glistened. "We don't get to rewrite the past, but sometimes we get the chance to end a story differently." As the shuttle doors slid closed, Eliot watched Anton through the glass standing still, hands in his coat pockets, head tilted upward to the stars. Clara nudged him. "You did the right thing, you know." Eliot didn't answer immediately. He stared out at the Seattle skyline rolling by. Then he said, more to himself than anyone, "Maybe now he'll understand what accountability feels like." Clara smiled. "And maybe you'll finally get to breathe without shrinking." Eliot exhaled. And for the first time that day, it didn't feel forced. 2 days after the flight, Eliot stood beneath a wooden awning outside a small cafe tucked into a quiet Seattle neighborhood. The morning rain had passed, leaving the streets damp and fragrant with cedar and coffee. He clutched the business card Anton Resnick had given him, running a thumb along the embossed letters. Master Carpenter. Nothing fancy, no degrees listed, just a name, a number. And Eliot now realized a lifetime of unfinished stories. The bell above the door jingled as he stepped inside. Anton was already seated at a corner table, a steaming mug in front of him. He stood as Eliot approached, that same calm gravity in his posture. "You came," Anton said. Eliot nodded. "I said I would." They sat. For a moment, the air between them was thick with what hadn't yet been said. Anton broke the silence. "I didn't sleep the night after the flight. I kept thinking about your grandfather. James wasn't just brave. He was kind, thoughtful, the type who looked out for the quietest guy in the room." Eliot leaned in. "You said he saved your life." Anton nodded slowly. 1975. Ambush outside who? I froze, completely paralyzed. James tackled me to the ground just before the first round hit, but in doing so, he got blamed for disobeying orders. They said he broke formation. I didn't speak up. I let them tarnish his name. His voice faltered. I told myself I was protecting him, that if I spoke, it would only draw more attention, maybe worse. But the truth is, I was afraid to challenge a system that had already decided what black soldiers were worth. Eliot sat quietly, the weight of those words settling in his chest. Not heavy, exactly, just true. He never told anyone, Eliot finally said. My dad said Grandpa always carried something, but never said what. Anton's eyes misted. That's the kind of man he was. Carried burdens others created. For a while, neither of them spoke. They sipped coffee, listened to the rain return, gently tapping the windows. Then Eliot reached into his bag and pulled out a worn photo, a black and white shot of his grandfather in uniform, arms slung around a fellow soldier. Anton stared. That's us. Eliot nodded. I found it in an old box. My dad never knew who the other man was. Anton reached out, fingertips grazing the image like he was touching memory itself. I owe him more than words, he whispered. Then don't let it end there, Eliot said, his voice steady. My generation. We're still fighting versions of what you two went through. But now, we've got people like you who finally stand, who speak. That matters. Anton looked at him, a flicker of something rare passing through his eyes. Hope. Eliot stood. I should go. I have the final round of the competition in an hour. Anton stood with him. You'll do well, not just because you're brilliant, but because you carry your legacy with honor. They shook hands. But this time, it wasn't just a thank you. It was a quiet passing of purpose from one man trying to atone to another trying to lead. As Eliot stepped into the light drizzle, he looked back once. Anton was still there, watching, witnessing. And this time, he wasn't silent. Lately, life feels like a balance between motion and meaning. Each day moves fast emails, deadlines, responsibilities, but in the quiet spaces, I've been learning to slow down and really listen to myself, to others, to what matters. There's this growing awareness in me, not just of what I'm doing, but why I'm doing it. I've been spending more time focusing on what fuels me emotionally, good conversations, meaningful work, and moments of stillness. I'm learning to let go of the need to have everything figured out, and instead, embrace the uncertainty with a bit more grace. Some days are heavy, filled with doubt or exhaustion, but even then, there are small victories, a kind message, a lesson learned, a moment of laughter. I'm realizing those are the threads that stitch joy into the fabric of everyday life. I'm not where I want to be yet, but I'm walking toward it with clarity, with questions, with hope. And that, for now, feels enough.